Welcome, everyone who is here. It's just me and Brian today, and everyone who will be watching later to this one of the meetings of the Disabled and Non-Disabled Alliance at Sacramento State. My name is William White. I'm our nominal president. Not nominal, this one's official. The other club I run is nominal. Okay, this presentation, this club meeting, but it's effectively going to be a video recording, is on disability in primary education, and we'll loosely define that as elementary school, some middle school. You'll get it. Yeah. Ooh, someone has. Okay. Loosely defined as as elementary school. We're going to be looking a little bit at what disability means and what public policy says about disability in primary education. Here is essentially our agenda. We're going to start with some announcements, and then we're going to go through some laws about disability in primary education, problems and pitfalls of those laws, some trends that disabled students frequently come away having noticed, so the benefits of inclusive environments, a riff on disabled educators, and then a free discussion portion that we may or may not leverage fully just because we have limited attendance at the moment. But hopefully we'll be able to get some stuff out. I will say right at the top of this that by no means do we at Dana or I personally claim this to be definitive work or comprehensive or any of those other nice words we'd love to be able to say about our presentations, for the simple reason that there was no way we were ever going to be able to cover everything we wanted to, everything that is relevant within the space allotted us. We typically like these meetings to go an hour about, and it's just too complex, too nuanced, too historically and mired an issue to properly cover. But we're going to talk a little bit about it. We're going to fulfill what I conceive as the sort of requirement of this club, which is to get disability more ingrained within the conversation and the zeitgeist at large. So that's what this is about. That's what we're doing. Here we go. Some announcements. First, this January, after Christmas, there's going to be at some point a disability diversity leadership conference hosted by student organizations and leadership. Hopefully, I'm in contact. I have a point of contact in SOL, Seoul, to the effect that we're probably going to present as a club, the Disabled Not Disabled Alliance. If you'd like to contribute anything to that presentation, talk about topics, or maybe suggest specific sorts of things we can cover, especially as a member of the club, we'd love to have you. We'd love to have you in on that conversation. There is already a message about it in the Discord if you're there. Otherwise, you can reach out to us via the email associated with this video, I think. Also, there is, because of the way weeks are distributed throughout the year, we're having our next meeting on the 19th, next week. Usually there's a 2-week gap, but there was an odd fifth Friday in October, not fifth Friday, yes, fifth Friday in October, which has made our schedule strange. We don't want to be having a meeting like on Thanksgiving or right near Christmas, so we're making the schedule such that our next meeting is on the 19th, and after that you'll have a 2-week grace period, I guess. Maybe it's more accurate to say that we'll have a 2-week grace period. Anyway, sorry about that. It's slightly strange, but that's how it's going to be. We want to be able to do this and not have it intersect with people's sort of holiday season celebrations and whatnot. Okay, so we're on to the thing. This is the topic. Here's a sort of spotlight on the kinds of public policies we'll be referencing throughout. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, that includes stipulations about the IEP, or Individual Education Plan. This is law specifically for disabled students in primary education. Then the Americans with Disabilities Act, we talked about that one at some length before. Title II is regarding, if I recall correctly, schools and such, the sort of educational stipulations about. And then the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, again, to do with disabled students in primary education. We're this is by no, again, not a comprehensive list. There's, for example, state legislation to go to talk at much more length about, because obviously states and municipalities are the ones doing most of the primary education. Not federal policy matters a lot, but it's not the whole story. And we're not even covering very much of federal policy. But anyway, let this be sort of a starting point. You can find these slides on our Discord server as well, I believe, or if not now, then after the meeting is over. And here are, again, it's a spotlight. It's by no means comprehensive, but this is sort of a thrown together compilation of some of the pitfalls and problems that arise from public policy around disability. And these are like surface level examples. We could talk in much more detail and nuance, but this will do for now. Schools are expected to child find under IDEA, which means they have to single out their own student populations as being disabled or not disabled, such as to apply special education. So what this means is that schools can sort of manipulate their numbers, and at least some schools, the example that was cited for me was in Texas, because of course it was, but at least some schools are occasionally manipulate their budgets and finances by child finding, basically underrepresenting the number of disabled students that they've got, the number of students who need special accommodations under the Individuals with Disability in Education Act. So they can do this fairly easily under the law. All they have to do is like not notice, like purposefully not notice when students are having trouble because of some kind of thing that is considered a disability. The fact of standardized public education usually butts heads with the fact that students get built different. This is by no means a problem exclusive to students who would traditionally be considered disabled. Every student is a little bit different, and every educator will tell you that. But the educational system needs to be a system of some description, right? So it has to be, there has to be some kind of standardization to the approach. Traditional classroom setting, you can imagine, is the sort of quintessential standardized approach. But the fact of that standardization means that it's very difficult to sort of properly accommodate each individual student as an individual student. And especially for disabled students, but yeah. This is a common problem in public policy, that the public policy itself is just straight up not complete. IDEA in particular was signed into law in the 70s and just never properly funded. Both the way its funding is allocated and the true amount of funding that it gets have been rightly and frequently criticized as being wildly inadequate to what it's trying to accomplish, even to the extent that we, categorically agree with what it's trying to accomplish, and that's a little bit up in the air too. We'll talk about it later, but IDEA does things like establish separate accommodations for students who may not need to be in a separate classroom, and so on and so forth. But even so, what we talk about at the top, the sort of underrepresentation of disabled students in individual school populations, is partly functional of the fact that the funding for IDEA is very strangely and inadequately allocated to schools. And that has cascading consequences, of course. The ADA and IDEA do very little, relatively speaking, and we talked about it at some length before, to make schools physically accessible for students. Like, we typically think of schools as having accessibility problems on the intellectual side. Students who are maybe autistic, or students who have what are generally categorized as intellectual disabilities or sensory disabilities like mine. That's generally the sort of area of problems that we think about. But the fact of the matter remains that schools are physical places. Typically, they are designed usually in such a way that some students are unable to access the grounds in the usual way. So things like the ADA's requirement to that you have to make the place more accessible when you renovate it. We've talked about it before. It was a subject of like the meeting before last, basically. But yeah, the ADA's requirements especially are relatively easy to circumvent, and they're, I would put it out there, put it to you that they are designed to be easy to circumvent so as to save money. But it costs a lot in terms of the quality of education that students with mobility impairments, let's say, are saddled with as a result. Again, by no means this is a comprehensive list. The link at the bottom here is another decent starting point if you wanted to talk look more into the sorts of things that arise from public policy around disability education. And now for the softer stuff. I say softer. It's not easy to talk about, but this is less in the area of stuff we have properly researched and more in the area of stuff that people with disabilities report later on. And I characterize it that way. By no means is this like not trustworthy. It's just not scientific data either. So, under the general category of social behavior, how disabled students navigate the world sometimes conflicts with how they are sort of supposed to navigate the world with regard to social conventions and such. Again, the fact of standardized education often butts heads with the fact of student individuality, and that's especially problematic for disabled students. Yeah, we, presuming a higher turnout, we set aside some time here to ask everyone about your individual experiences. I think for the sake of the fluidity of the presentation, we'll push that to the end where there's a free discussion bit, but please hold on to that. Like us here in the room, we all have been through primary education, so we will absolutely be talking about those personal experiences later on. For now, I'll continue on with the trends a little bit. Students with disabilities face prejudice in much the same way as anybody with disabilities will face prejudice. And it's often exacerbated by the fact that the people on the other side of this transaction are also children who themselves maybe don't realize that they're doing prejudice or have no grasp of the concept in the first place, perhaps. Yeah. Also, some of the people on the other side of the prejudice are the teachers who are, let's say, ignorant about disability. I can tell you, both from personal experience and from general knowledge, that teachers do not have a comprehensive knowledge of disabilities and what that means for the individual students who have them. The students, meanwhile, do not necessarily understand their own disabilities because they're kids in primary education, elementary school. But from the side of the peer group, we have standard run-of-the-mill bullying and teasing that gets exacerbated by disability, and I'll leave to the stressful memories of the people watching this what exactly that will mean, but we'll talk about it a little bit more later on. Okay, more of these. This is, again, not a comprehensive list, but I'll run through like 2 of these. I can tell you, again, because I personally have a visual disability, that having sensory impairment and the giant glasses needed to sort of accommodate the sensory impairment, and the fact that those giant glasses don't give you 20/20 vision makes it very difficult for certain kids. The term 4 eyes has certainly fallen out of fashion, but not like the fact of making fun of kids for not being able to read things. Yeah. Something like a sort of intellectual disability, we think of it as something like dyslexia or dyscalculia, severely impact your ability to read and write for reasons that have nothing to do with your comprehension of language or math. So it's very easy for kids who don't understand that to make fun of the kids who also don't understand that but have dyslexia and dyscalculia. I should say, or typically there may be intersection, there can be. And what it translates to, if you have dyslexia or calculated, is that you will struggle with very basic concepts in math and reading. And that will usually translate into being made fun of by your peer group who doesn't struggle in the same way or for the same reasons that you do. Again, this is a list. It's nothing more than a list. It's not comprehensive. There are a plethora of ways that kids can get bullied for disabilities because kids in general are very creative. And this is again another trend that most disabled people will have noticed, that you often have to explain your disability because people don't understand it. You can chalk some of this up to just teachers not being well trained, but in general, people don't fully understand disability or what that means for the people who have it. So yeah, the burden falls on elementary school age kids to understand and explain their disabilities when they're prompted to, in order often to receive any kind of accommodation. And then there's the sort of the problem of not very much data, or to the extent that there is data, it may not be totally reliable because again, like we've talked a little bit about the sort of child finding practice that's associated with IDEA. This is a Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. The fact of that sort of child finding general guideline is that students may not be singled out who have disabilities. So how many students have IEPs who need them is honestly an open question. And what kind of let's say what kind of barriers do schools face meeting students' needs? Because again, budgetary restrictions. We talked already about how IDEA doesn't allocate its budget especially well. Again, not a comprehensive list by any means, but this is sort of where poorly written public policy or inadequately written public policy makes it the case that we don't know as much as we would like to about disability. And honestly, disability itself is sort of nebulous and context sensitive and in a way that will make it hard to study regardless. But the fact that we in Dana and people in general can find so little out about disability in concrete terms remains a problem for how we want to rewrite public policy if we were going to. Okay. This is me riffing a little bit about why we have such problems in primary education and in education in general for disabled students. There's a fundamental, I think, challenge that you have to face as an educator, as an administrator, as a policy writer. There is the hard problem of separation. In general, a student with a disability is just defined as a student who can't learn as well as possible in the sort of traditional classroom setting. Otherwise, at least for the purposes of primary education, that student just isn't disabled. I take the social model. We in Dana generally take the social model of disability, which is to say that disability is context sensitive. It's a product of your environment. The school isn't built for you, therefore you are disabled. So yeah, disability can necessitate a sort of a difference in educational approach, and that can mean a separate classroom entirely for some individuals. One example that's been pointed out is that certain disabilities entail being overwhelmed by the traditional classroom setting. Maybe that's like being sensorily overwhelmed, or being too comprehensively distracted by the traditional classroom setting. Whatever it may be, again, it's context sensitive. You need people trained in order to see these kinds of things in order to understand it fully. But yeah, in such contexts, a separate facility can be necessary, but separation costs a lot for what you get out of it. Most of the problems that I've listed and not talked very much about, but listed a little bit so far, are product directly of not public policy per se, but of people as a result of public policy not understanding disability. And the reason for that in general is this separation. The fact of the separation is that when you are separate from an entire group of people, you're not liable to understand that group of people very well. There's a sort of perspective that gets built up over time of how people normally, and I put that in scare quotes, it may not be obvious, but how people normally operate. And that if that perspective as a child is built for you by non-disabled students who are in the traditional classroom setting and are, you know, well suited to it because it's built for them, then by definition, by stipulation, I guess, the other side of that, the students who are disabled, who are unable to thrive in that classroom setting in the same way, will be other, will be the different, and in a pejorative way, you're likely to think, as again, as a kid. I don't mean to say that all adults operate this way, some of them do, but yeah, essentially, when you separate people, they are broadly not going to understand each other as well as if you did not separate them. So this becomes a difficult problem. Like, you sometimes need separate facilities, a different approach for students. But to the extent that you administrate that, to the extent that you make that the policy of the school, the administrative policy, you're going to be separating students out from their sort of non-disabled peers, who then are not going to understand those students in different settings. That results cascadingly in the kinds of bullying we've already seen on the list in the PowerPoint, and the kinds of treatment you might remember very personally from being in elementary school. It's that, yeah, essentially the hard problem of separation is just the problem of perspective building. It's the same sort of thing that's arisen, I think, in every civil rights debate. When you separate people, they don't get each other, and when they don't get each other, they mistreat each other, and there's a huge power imbalance between disabled and non-disabled students. It's a whole thing. The discourse is ongoing, and the conceptual problem at work here makes it such that I don't think this can be solved, but different models of education can get closer or further from the perfect model. That can be better or worse than each other, even if we can't, strictly speaking, solve the problem of separation. So, broadly speaking, I personally, and there's some reason to think so, come down on the side of inclusiveness as much as possible, so as to generate as much as possible of that sort of perspective, of that community and understanding among students. And there are some like loosely categorized benefits before you. The article that's featured here is very general. It's very, you might even say it's quite vague, but it talks about inclusivity as being in the classroom with special accommodations for disabled students made in that classroom setting rather than a separate facility altogether. When you talk about inclusivity in the classroom, you're talking about instructors being adaptable to students' needs. It increases engagement, allows students to build better understanding of one another, even through having different abilities overall. Translate that to the classroom, it's mostly about, not the classroom, sorry. Translate that into the playground, and it's mostly about the facility and the way it's built. I talked a little bit about how ADA and IDEA don't do very much to necessitate that schools build playgrounds in an accessible way for facilities in general, but especially playgrounds, because they might be considered non-essential. But they're not really non-essential. If you don't have a place to play as a small child, you're not going to develop. I should say, I guess I should say normally, you're not going to develop ideally. It's just important for social animals of all stripes to play as kids, and the fact of playgrounds not being accessible to some disabled students means that those students are being denied a huge portion of what they need to develop socially and intellectually. We can say
I
a lot
guess
more
like
about that, but
yeah, I guess to like add on to that, like one of the benefits of like full inclusion like in schools is that a lot of people would kind of get know how to interact with disabled like people. Like some people who never interacted with a disabled person doesn't know how to interact like with that person. So it kind of helps them treating them like a normal human being, like any regular human being, and just and they don't like feel any different about it.
yeah, yeah, we've at least among the club here, we've talked at some length. We've shared things about the way people with obvious, like visually obvious disabilities, I guess, what should I say, visible disabilities, are sometimes treated in places of public accommodation. And it's very easy to sort of connect the dots on this one, right? Where people in as children even don't gain perspective as to what disability is and what it means, and so as adults internalize some wildly off notions about what disabled people are like and what they need. One of the manifestations of that lack of perspective is that non-disabled people sometimes pity and mistreat by patronizing people with obvious disabilities. Another way in which this is manifested, some autistic people who have involuntary or barely voluntary movements associated with their disability, with their autism, are construed as like drug addicts by people who evidently do not know what autism is or what it means, or what sort of behavior sort of manifests from it. And it all cascades from this, like people in early life even, who just never develop a framework for disability and what it means and how to operate with it. But yeah, so speaking to the benefits of inclusiveness to the greatest extent that it is possible, one of those benefits is the greater quality and quantity of this perspective that develops in early childhood, so as to make adults less terrible to each other. I'm not sure I'm seeing what's actually being displayed on Zoom. My Zoom is apparently garbage. So please, let's go on to the next slide.
Okay, yeah, I'll just go on next slide.
We'll probably return to this topic and a few others in discussion, but yeah, this one's about disabled educators. We've been talking about students so far, but part of the problem that we observe here is that there are very few teachers who themselves are disabled. Again, it's an old figure, but from 2012, less than 1% of disabled teachers in the US existed. Let me rephrase that. Less than 1% of teachers in the US were disabled in 2012. And there's a reasonable chance that number has diminished as an indirect result of the pandemic, and as an indirect result of other sort of public policy decisions that have been made since 2012. But there's no reason much to think that it's gotten significantly better. Simply, if only because like the pandemic may have made teaching more accessible to more people, but not with enough time for those people to get their teaching credentials and so forth. Anyway, there are many challenges that are presented to disabled people who want to be educators. As it happens, Rian, who is our previous president and still one of our officers, an integral member of the club, is not here today. But Rian could very much speak to these kinds of things more aptly than I could, because Rian wants to be an educator of people. So would have a sort of more comprehensive understanding. But I will just say, in broader terms, that if it is difficult to be a teacher in general, it is difficult to be a disabled teacher more. So yeah, what we're essentially saying here is that it would be great if more in the way of understanding and accommodations could be made available to people who have disabilities and want to be educators, because they have a lot to offer. I mean, if you subscribe to the idea that in general adversity makes you stronger, then disabled teachers are going to be some of the strongest people out there. Anyway, there's very much more to say, but I'm already taking up a lot of time, so we can return to this in discussion portion. Oh, which is now. Sorry. So this is the bit where we hope to have many more members of the club speak on the issues, because we've genuinely, like, even if I were to read verbatim everything in this PowerPoint and add riffs where I want to, we would barely cover the topic. So here are some optional prompts, and alternatively, just like this is the bit where we want to share personal experiences with education and what that sort of means. I also want to get at some point to the to ideas in the realm of like policy recommendations, how we can improve on this system that has not really been covered, because frankly, I don't have a lot of answers in this area, and I don't think anybody does. But any contribution we can make to that realm would be ideal. I mean, we talk about inclusivity, but it's a vague topic. Um, so yeah, personal experiences. I we have a couple people here, so let's go with that. I won't go first.
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. So I have like a really like short kind of story. I'll probably answer like the first one probably. But like in my high school, we had a media production class, and like we could take this class for 3 years because they had like different levels. So like media production one, two, and three. And like in the classroom, there was like a stage. But I was like, I actually took this class for 3 years, but like I was unable to get on the stage like for 2 years, like throughout. Yeah, and like I guess it had a stage because it used to be like a drama room. But like I was kind of fine with this. We had like workarounds, like for example for green screen, like you just need like a green background. Yeah, green background. Like everyone had access to the green screen that's on the stage, like but me. Essentially, like green paint was painted on the wall, so it was easy like that. But like my teacher like had to have like a green cloth like behind me so that I could practice green screen. Like that's like a good workaround. But like in my third year, it was completely different. Like third years, like start learning TV production. Like we learned and had our own news show, like with a three camera setup and like a control room in the back. But it was like in the stage, on the stage. So like I wasn't able to get on the stage at all, and yeah, I wasn't able to get on it, so I wasn't really be able to fully participate in it. I guess like in the news like station, you always see these commercials, these openings, and like I could have done that, but I wouldn't be fully immersed into the class. So to kind of like combat this, my principal, my teacher, like my mom had to write multiple letters to the district, kind of convincing the district why I need a ramp, why the school needs to ramp, and it took over like 2 months of like back and forth. But like somehow I was able to get the ramp be built in the class, so I could access the stage. And like the stage, the only way to access it was like 2 steps, and because I'm in a wheelchair, I'm not able to get on there. So like so like in 2 months the ramp was built, and like now I was like fully immersed into the class, so I wasn't really missing anything for the class. Actually, you can check out like the full story on my YouTube channel, and I will like yeah, I actually created like a documentary about it. It's called The Ramp, and like we will also be posting it on the Disabled and Non-Disabled Alliance. So like if you want to know like the fuller story, kind of from like my classmates' perspective and like my teacher's perspective, then you should check it out. But like, I guess that it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like you have to convince the district to kind of build it. It should be already there. The ramp should have already been there. So like that. I guess like that was one of my personal experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be very interested to find out like what exactly the obstacle was there. Is it maybe it's you get this kind of situation is because the school itself is or the district itself is administrated in a slow and inefficient way, or maybe somebody was thinking, you know, somebody with power was thinking, uh, this you don't really need me to give money to this project for one student to participate fully in a class that we offered that student. um,
Yeah, honestly,
the logic on this is hard.
I think it's because of that probably. Like yeah, they saw no reason for that specifically for that ramp to be built.
Yeah, that's I mean that's fundamentally shameful. I'm happy to go off on my tangent as well. But I just we have one other person in the meeting right now. If this is so, I invite you if you'd like to contribute to commit something to the archive if you want. Otherwise, I'll go off.
I was just thinking about like how you said that children have to know about disability and stuff earlier in the presentation,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering how online learning affected them, because I'm assuming for children, if they have any form of learning disability and everything being online and generalized, it would have been much harder.
Yeah, I mean, conceivably so. I have not done any research on that topic particularly, but it's easy. Yeah, it's easy to imagine, right? You can take a person with like a sensory impairment like mine. Actually, if my eyes make it very difficult to read, relatively difficult to use computers. So if you're not like me, if you don't have access to bigger and more screens on which to display and use software that makes things more accessible, then the transition to online education effectively means being deprived of the usual ways in which you might compensate for visual disability specifically. That being to listen like as much as you can and to have people read things aloud. Um, that becomes much harder if you haven't got the kinds of if you haven't got the kind of home life where that stuff can be accomplished anyway. um
Yeah, I guess like from what I know, like from like YouTube videos, I know like a lot of people with like students in elementary school like with disabilities like kind of lost like a whole year of like learning, and like for example I guess like they have to restart the whole thing, the whole kind of process again. So like someone is like really like great. Someone had like a routine already, but because of the whole like semester, they had to like relearn the routine like when it's back in person. So it's like a whole like learning process again.
yeah, I mean, there's a perfectly uh adequate level of disruption that you get just by being a person, any person living through a pandemic where everything has to transition to an online phase. But being a disabled person, all else being equal, will make that significantly more of a disruption. On the flip side, people with mobility impairments might have had an easier time this last little while, as much as at least specifically with regard to like learning stuff. Because as much as the transition to online things has wildly diminished the level of social interaction a lot of people are able to get day to day, and that's going to be especially impactful for small kids. Uh, it's also true that in general, for the reasons we talked about, schools are designed in such a way as to exclude people with mobility impairments oftentimes. uh, that the transition to the all online stuff might have made things relatively easy to grasp for educationally for people with mobility impairments. So there's, I don't know, silver linings. I'd still say I'd rather have like in-person education designed in such a way as to probably accommodate people, but yeah. um, I'll speak somewhat on sort of the personal side of things. As I say, I grew up with a visual disability that made things very difficult. Um, and it made things very difficult, like all else being equal. Like there was no getting around the fact that as a kid, I couldn't see stuff as well as everyone else could. Um, for those who don't know already, I have a set of medical ocular conditions, one of which is nystagmus. That's kind of the severe one. Um, Congenital nystagmus, which is characterized by the rapid involuntary movement of the eyes. I probably looked real weird most of the time as a kid, and I probably look real weird now because of what my eyes are doing basically all the time. But as a kid, I didn't like understand anything about my eyes. I just knew they didn't work very well, and I could really only describe them in terms of they don't work very well. So when it fell to me to explain why I couldn't read the board, or that I couldn't read the board even, it was difficult. If not because I couldn't explain, if not because I couldn't explain, then because I didn't want to, because I didn't want to feel lesser, because that was the sort of zeitgeist I was working with. Um, so yeah, the fact of not being very well understood made a somewhat severe disability feel a lot more severe than it was in elementary school before I had perspective and adaptive strategies and so on and so forth. Um, and that made social interaction really hard. There was this sort of cascading effect of having a visual disability that wasn't well accounted for, um, that proceeded all the way through high school. I mean, to be honest, I have better memories from high school because I had some understanding and adaptation to my disability, but uh, from elementary school, I only sort of intellectually understood that the teachers in general didn't have it out for me. Uh, I genuinely have no good memories from that time. um, and if I can say something even maybe slightly oversharing, some of that, the sort of aggression, some of that stress that built up over the day because I couldn't understand properly, I couldn't like intellectualize in the way I do now why I was so fed up and miserable in school. Even with special education, I didn't like being in special education any more than I would have liked being not in special education. Some of that aggression made its way home, and I did some things that I'm not proud of, that I still feel terrible about to this day. Uh, so yeah, and a lot of that was because a lot of that, not because I had a disability directly, but because that disability was not understood by people around me and not well accounted for by the system that I happened to be in. Again, I was in special education. I was very lucky to have people around me who wanted to understand, but they just didn't. Uh, so that's even that's my sort of take on it. Essentially, that if people knew specifically in my case like what nystagmus is and what it means, there would have been less reason to be miserable in elementary school. Some of that misery is down to just the kind of kid I was, but a lot of it is down to the fact that I couldn't excel in the at the one handful of things that I was okay at, which were sort of auditory and tactile and stuff. Um, because the disability was not understood, not well accounted for, and because the system that I happen to be working with just does not encourage that. Um, yeah, and in general, this is a trend I've noticed that sort of holds out, especially people with like more severe disabilities than I have. The onus is on them to explain and to account for themselves and to uh, be adaptive to their environment rather than having their environment adapt to them properly. And that's even when schools take you, your elementary school, say, takes you and puts you in a separate classroom for a part of the day to try to, administrate education to you in such a way that is going to be more effective than the classroom setting. Even in those environments, you get confronted with the fact that people don't, understand you very well, and you have to try and account for that in how you proceed through things. That gets easier with age, but it doesn't seem to get more just. It doesn't seem to get more more abling, I guess, more conducive to good education. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess like since you're talking about like high school education and like you were like I guess like I guess like what's the class called again? Like I guess like the disabled class, something like that.
Oh, for me it
Okay.
was special education.
There it goes. Yeah,
That's the
special
typical. I
education
think that's the generic term, and that's kind of
is.
all I understood it as.
Yeah, but anyways, like I can think of like a story, a specific story. So like I wasn't like in special ed at all. I was taking like the normal classes, the regular classes, I guess. And like but on the other hand, like my friend was completely in special education. So like when kind of like when she was taking like more like regular classes, like I guess like stats, that's a regular class, like algebra, like she was like put into that class like in sophomore year, and like she didn't really understand like anything, and she was struggling completely in that class. And I guess for me, like the highest math class I took was like, I guess like the lowest math class I took was was like algebra too, and I guess the highest one was like calculus. But like I'm kind of like telling this story because I guess like this person didn't really understand algebra concepts at all, because of her like education, like for special education. Sometimes it's really like backwards. Sometimes they don't like teach like normal things. They teach more about life stuff. But yeah, so like when she was transitioning to like normal classes, she was struggling completely because she didn't understand those math concepts that's supposed to like be built on like in elementary school or like middle school. So like she like struggled with like that class, math specifically.
So there was, and we could understand this is probably a much broader problem. Not that I have specific memory of it, but
Mm-hmm.
there is a difference in the quality of education you get from people who are specialized to teach different things when you are in a separate classroom.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I think like special education doesn't really prepare you for like college specifically. They don't like teach you like math. They teach you more like life things, how to like take care of yourself, how to cook, things like that. But like they don't actually teach you be ready for college. So math, English, they do English, but not like that difficult.
yeah, I can tell you that like the special education experience for me was a little bit more academic and than sort of life skill oriented. And maybe I there were other classes that other disabled students went to, but for me it was much more like a sort of one-on-one with a different teacher, a different teacher in a smaller group of other kids with similar caliber disabilities to myself. It was academic. I think it did teach me as much as it was supposed to. In terms of academics, I would have killed to learn how to cook in high school. That would have been great to have a direct sort of instruction there. I would have been annoyed, but I would be able to cook now. So yeah, basically, the broader problem is probably that special education is expressed in different ways by different institutions, and what that sometimes means is that there's a radical difference in the quality of education that you get, not the quality of education you're able to get as a person who thinks, because oftentimes disability um, makes you seem like a lesser learner, like the lesser intellect, but in fact you have perfectly, normal, I should say, average range of intellectual capacity
Yeah,
that is
and
just
I guess
expressed in
like there's
different ways.
something like to mention something else. It's like they had like options to take math, like if they wanted to. Like I guess that was my friend's option. She wanted to take math because she wanted to go to college. I guess like I guess like harder level math. Like sure, like in special education, they teach you like regular math, like how to add, like I guess like really simple algebra, but they don't actually like teach you the things you need to go to college to be really prepared for it.
Yeah,
I have a question.
sure.
Do you have to do the A through G's when you're like in special education?
I think it really just depends on like the student.
I'm not familiar with the if I heard that right, A through G's.
Yeah,
I can tell you I
essentially
took
it's just
standardized
like
tests. But
the general education. Like think of it like a general education like at campus at Sac State. But
hmm,
like the ATG is like math, English, geography, history, things like that.
huh. Um, yeah, I mean, as far as I know, I have not taken that, but like personally, I did go through special, not special, standardized tests. That's the whole point, is they're not special. Um, and actually, this is a funny sort of point of contention between me and and the world. They gave me big booklets typically for standardized tests. They would basically photocopy the test materials and reprint them on double sized pieces of paper, such that the text is bigger. And my initial thinking was, hey, that's cool. That makes it easier. It makes me look weird, and I don't like that. But that should make things easier. And it turned out not really to make things any easier. Nystagmus doesn't operate on the size of the characters, but rather on the distance from the person looking at them. And again, not well understood either by me or especially by my educators. So they gave me these big print tests and thought, that'll be fine. Not realizing like that those accommodations did not help. They did very little, in fact, other than make me feel self-conscious in the standardized testing arena. Ultimately, I around high school, I was learning, oh, wait a second, nystagmus doesn't work like that. There's something called, it's not parallax, but it's a similar principle to parallax, where the angle of vision is important. So I was just putting my face closer to the paper like I'd always been, and it was fine. And I didn't feel strange about it during standardized tests. And that is the kind of thing that you can only achieve under the current system, seemingly through individual experience and adaptive strategy on the part of the disabled student. The school didn't do that for me. It did the opposite of that. So yeah, that's kind of the thesis of the day. It turns out for me is just that inclusion is great for the specific reason that it builds understanding between diverse sets of people. So where it is possible, I think it ought to be encouraged for every reason that we've detailed so far today. And the caveat, of course, that it's not always possible to be fully inclusive. Sometimes there's administrative reasons why that's not possible, and that can only be addressed in the broader arena of public policy. If schools are underfunded, for example, they can't hire as many teachers as they might need to, or the right sort of caliber and specialization of teachers that they would need in order to be fully inclusive. But just in general, students who are able to be accommodated for in non-separate facilities would be, I think, I'm putting it out there, not on behalf of Dana, but on behalf of myself. I think that in general, the keeping kids in the traditional classroom setting as much as possible and making accommodations at that site is the way to go. And of course, with the understanding that it's not possible for every student in every case. Yeah. We can, if we haven't got any other sort of points we want to revisit or talk about fresh, we can go ahead and proceed to the last slide, I think, and I can sort of sign us out. Thank you, everyone who's here and for coming, and everyone who will hopefully be joining us next time, and otherwise just watching the video in the archive. This has been a meeting of the Disabled and Non-Disabled Alliance here at Sacramento State. Again, by no means is this supposed to be the end of the discussion, but this is what we were able to produce with the time and resources allotted. Our next meeting is on November 19th at 7 p.m. Same bat time, same bat location. So yeah, please join us for that. I have forgotten what the topic is. Does anybody in the chat here remember offhand for next meeting?
I think it's laws of disability.
Okay, a deeper dive into the laws surrounding disability.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
Yeah. Just a deeper dive.
All right, awesome.
We talk about reasonable accommodations and like how these laws kind of get made.
Okay, that's gonna be. I'm gonna have a lot to say. I have anecdotes about primary education, but my education in general has been sort of public policy focused and philosophical. So that's going to be interesting for me personally. But I hope you will join us then for a more in-depth discussion. And in the meantime, drive safe if you drive. I got no sign up. Bye.